It's hard to believe that February is just around the corner, the month of romance, small, thoughtful gestures that remind us to pause and celebrate the people we love. But long before the mass marketed holiday that we know, Valentine's Day was celebrated with handcrafted valentines, handwritten messages, and sometimes a bit of mischief. Today, we are going behind the scenes of this tradition with Nancy Rosin from the National Valentine Collectors Association. We're going to explore the rich history of Valentines, from Victorian era treasures to early 20th century keepsakes, and hear some stories about the people, customs, and messages that have been preserved over generations. Whether you are a collector, a history buff, or just love the romance of it all, you will find something fun in this conversation. It was really informative and interesting, and I'm just super excited to share it with you. Welcome to Grandma's Silver, where tradition meets today. I'm Allie, your host of the Grandma's Silver podcast and founder of the Grand Millennial Lifestyle. Here, we blend aesthetics with nostalgia, engaging in conversations with lifestyle brands, designers, and more to rediscover the timeless charm of the past. Join me as we journey from home to heart, illuminating the past and polishing the present with the gleam of Grandma's Silver. Nancy, I'm very excited to chat with you today. Listeners cannot see, but I wore my pink today. In the spirit of this conversation, I see you were in pink too. So I want to just give you an opportunity to quickly introduce yourself and tell folks who you are. And I think that'll help set the tone for the rest of our conversation.
I'm Nancy Rosin. I've been collecting Valentines for half a century. I'm a retired nurse, have 4 children, 5 grandchildren, and Valentines have been a part of our lives, it seems forever. They used to just be put on a shelf where I enjoyed them, and now they're all over the house. We celebrate Valentine's Day every day of the year because it's love. It's not just Valentine's. Collecting Valentines is really related to friendship, love, devotion, all good things. I collected, I guess, because I had a very happy marriage of almost 50 years. And I think you don't collect things like love unless you have a happy life. And so that's a good thing. I started collecting really by accident. We were out on one Sunday afternoon when my husband and I went driving, and the grandparents said, "Go, have a good time." We ended up in New Hope, Pennsylvania. And in a shop, I found an album filled with little scraps, little die-cut scraps. Wasn't sure what I would do with them, but at that time, decoupage was very popular. And I thought, when the kids are a little bit older and I have more time, I'm going to create wonderful masterpieces with decoupage. But then I discovered that they really were decorations on the later Victorian Valentines, and that got me interested. I started collecting. The collection got refined over the years. I wanted to go earlier and more rare. And my husband said at one point, if you're going to do this if you're going to make a collection, you want it to be the best in the world. So he was my enabler. I enabled him to collect Japanese art. So the house is a combination of Japanese and Victorian Valentines. I made a little display on some shelves in my children's elementary school for Valentine's Day. And one of the parents was a writer for the local shopper newspaper. And she came to my house and did a little photo story with my children in the pictures. And that just sparked everything. I started getting calls for people wanted me to talk for newcomers and church groups and every imaginable group. And I had a regular schedule. And I knew what I was talking about because I'd read the only 2 books that existed. Now I feel like after really 50 years of collecting, I've absorbed a lot and I have my own information to contribute, which I hope to do forthcoming if I ever seem to have time to write a book. But collecting Valentines is really, it's about people. It's about how they celebrated love, how they acknowledged one another. From the earliest gift that someone gave to another person, maybe a flower or a feather or some small note written on a little scrap of paper. People have exchanged messages of friendship. And so I've just followed this evolution. One of the books, a famous book by a man named Frank Staff, who was a postal collector in England, his book really followed the evolution. And I think my collection kind of emulated that a little bit. He wanted to go from the earliest things to the most recent. It told a lot about the things that affected the publication or the manufacture of Valentines. It was whether it was war or distance or the postal system or the kind of paper that was available. All of these things affected the way that people could create Valentines. In the earlier days, they were handmade because commercial things weren't available. But I'm going to show you some things to give you an idea of this evolution because I think it's so important. What I like about them is that there is a tactile quality of the paper, I call it the fingerprints of love. And you can feel what the people felt when they had these, when they made them, or when they opened them up and were surprised and elated and maybe shocked or in
Yeah.
love. Who knows? But it tells you a lot about the kinds of people. Valentines were shared by every stratum of society, poor, rich, whether you bought it in a fancy shop and it was some incredible confection, or if it was simply, reused wallpaper or scrap of some kind of paper. It was a holiday that everyone enjoyed, every race, every avocation. And so I'm going to show you one of the earliest things that I have really are pages from 1493, the Nuremberg Chronicle, and then Chaucer a little later writing about the birds choosing their mates on Valentine's Day. So those are the earliest things if you wanted to do research. If you want to look for things that you can possibly find, this is an example of a devotional. And
Okay.
this is from about 1700. I don't know if you can see
I
it.
can. Yeah, it has cutouts in it. Is
It
that
has cutouts.
okay?
So this would be called a canivet because the French word for the knife that was used to to sharpen crow quills was called a canivet. So in French, they're called canivet. We call them devotionals. Tiny piece of parchment with cut out the name of the saint and this beautiful little picture. And they were in many varieties of them. The first one I found was under the glass in a shop. And the man said he didn't have any Valentines. And I said, well, what about that? And he said, oh, well, you can have that for $10. And I walked away thrilled because
Yeah.
I'd only seen a picture of one, and here it was. So sometimes a little knowledge goes a long way. You know what you're looking for. And that's what I try to share with collectors because some of these, even the most rare, they become available. People die, collections come up for sale. It's not something that's over and done with, but it's evolving and you can still become a collector. You can start with just going to auctions or looking in books, going to museums. You don't have to buy it, but people should have a little knowledge and always buy, warned collectors always buy from reputable dealers who will take back the product if it isn't as they promised.
Okay. Can I interrupt you for 1 second?
Yeah,
For these that you are showing, are you able to later text me pictures of them so I
sure,
can upload them so folks
sure.
can have a visual to put
Yeah,
beside these?
yeah.
Wonderful.
So that was like 1700. Well, in the late 1700s, we have another kind of gift of love. And this, and if you can see it,
Oh,
I'll show you from the back, this is mounted on chiffon. And
wow.
this is Austrian. And these were started with a little border. This one is a silver border, the altar of love, the flaming altar. These we call Biedermeiers because of the era that they were made. They were started as gifts for friendship, for name day, for celebrations, and also for love. And there's a whole group of these. Some of them are movable, but they're like the thing that everyone is looking for. So
Is
it's
it a
paper.
weighted silver or it's
No,
paper?
it's paper.
It looks
And
like a heavy silver frame from
I
the
know.
camera.
But this kind of silver, which we affectionately call Dresden because they were made in Dresden, Germany, you'll see them a lot for die cuts. Sometimes they're little cupids or flowers or various things. At this point, all of these flowers, which are later, we'll see them machine made, these were all handmade. They're like little clay. They're really wonderful. These are like the precursors of the real Valentine. Sometimes I think that some of these Austrian ones incorporated things like a cobweb that we talk about and we see later. They were received perhaps by people in England where the industry became very big around 1800. So I think that the ideas were shared. The next kind of thing that we have really are things on just paper because the quality of paper, the kind of paper that was made was very important. In the beginning, there was just plain paper. And here we see, this is called The Sailor's Farewell. And
Oh,
this was done around 1790s by Francesco Bartolozzi. And the theme of The Sailor's Farewell, we see that all over. And it's my favorite theme, I think. We see it many years later. We see it during all the wars. But here we have the man is going off. The ship is waiting for him. There's a cupid up here aiming an arrow, and they're saying their farewells. He has his little possessions in his ditty bag attached by a kerchief there. And he's got friends in this boat, which you'll see when I send you the picture. And they're telling him, hurry up, hurry up. But this is an example of an early paper. And we enjoy the paper because it's handmade, it has a watermark, and it's kind of a treasure. And I found it on the wall of not this one, but the one that was framed in a furniture booth in an antique show. And the people just thought it was a nice decoration. But what I'm trying to show you is it was paper, the evolution of paper that made some of these beautiful things available. People couldn't always write their own poetry. If they were going to had a beautiful piece of stationery, they would just write a letter on it. And so they had to have little books that were like cheat sheets. This is an example of an
of
English.
Hallmarkisms.
So this is Cupid's annual charter, and it's got a beautiful image done by Cruikshank. And then it's filled with pages of poetry with a Valentine and the answer. So people could copy those. And if they couldn't copy them themselves because maybe they didn't know how to write, they could have a shopkeeper write it. Everyone wasn't capable of creating those. So
And those were that letter that you showed me. So that's almost the equivalent of like an 8 by 11. It was that
well, that
large.
one, that one is a little bit larger. But then we have others that I have one here that I didn't take it out of the plastic, but I can send you a picture. This is 1792. And what this shows you really is that
Oh,
there
wow.
was a punch, and they put this
Yeah.
punch on every corner to create lace. And they wrote on every place, even on the back, it's all written. And this beautiful image of a dove delivering a Valentine. This is an early example of what they were doing with paper. And a few years later, they were able to emboss it. And the manufacturers, and there's a huge industry of Valentine paper makers, and they would emboss paper beautifully. And you would have creations like something like this. You can see the lace
That is
paper.
stunning.
Yeah, you can see that. And here it's got watercolor and it's got satin in the middle and little flowers and a message. And this is like the ultimate. We're talking about 1840s, 1850. At first, the lace paper was not open work. It was just cameo embossed. And then by accident, a workman discovered that if the plates rubbed against each other, certain parts would be removed and, and it became lace paper. And that was about 1835.
Wow.
So that's another example. And another kind of early one, this is on an American paper it was lithographed. And what you're going to see is what people are always anxious to see, the cobweb. This one is magical because when we pull the threads, there's a double cobweb
Oh, how neat.
and there's a picture inside. And the flowers, this is incorporating the language of flowers, which is kind of a wordless way to send a message because the rose symbolizes love. And here we have the passion flower. And every color rose has a different significance. And there were little books available for people to learn the symbolism. Like this one has a woman receiving a letter on one side. I didn't think you could see it.
Oh, yeah. So
There's a
behind the rose, when
proposal.
you pull on it,
Yeah.
it actually reveals the
So
secondary.
that's unique. I mean, a double cobweb is like hen's teeth. They're not found very often. And you have to be very careful because they're very fragile. But
Mhm.
everyone knows about cobweb valentines, so I had to show them. So we're talking about evolution. Everyone couldn't afford a manufactured Valentine. In America, the only things you could find in the early 1800s were lithographed or wood engraved Valentines in lower New York, where there were companies making them. They imported some of these fancy Valentines. But a lot of people just made their own. One of the kinds that we see is called Scherenschnitt, which is a kind of paper cut. And this is just a picture of one because my real collection, this is peripheral collection I've been assembling since I sent my collection to the Huntington Library. So this is just a picture, but this will give you an idea of the kind of elaborate cut work with initials and cupids And there was Proctor, the Pennsylvania German art. There were things like the endless knot of love, just over and over. And another kind that we see often is called a puzzle purse. This is folded right now, and this is an example of one that's open. So this would be a kind of a folded puzzle. And when you opened it, first of all, you might not be able to refold it very carefully. Pages would be numbered, and people could unfold it for the message. And it was often said, it's the endless knot, which, like the wedding ring, has no beginning nor end. That was the theme often. Another kind of handmade Valentine is this one, which shows you it's got like pinking along the edges and flower baskets. This is from about 1840, this one. It's in the shape of a heart. People of every income level, no matter what, they would take a piece of paper and they would create something. One of the wonderful handmade ones that I love is called a watch paper. And watch papers, if a person had a pocket watch and it needed to be repaired, the watchmaker would put a little piece of paper in to protect the mechanism from dust, and it would have an advertisement for his watch company. But you could make a little paper one like this, and this is from 1790.
Wow.
It has a basket of flowers and the doves. It would fit inside the watch. And every time the gentleman opened his watch to see, is it lunchtime or is it time to go? He would see a message from his beloved. There are a number of them in the collection at the American Antiquarian Society. And there are places where you can see Valentines online.
So I know that you were saying, I mean, obviously in Europe, this predates when we were doing things. But
Right.
in the United States or in America, has this always been manufactured?
Well, they were manufactured, as I mentioned, these publishers in downtown New York around 1840, late 1830s. There were people who did publish comic Valentines, wood engraved Valentines, and they would import fancy ones from England, but no one was making the fancy ones here. So if we see a really elaborate one with an early date, maybe someone wrote in pencil or pen on it, we know that it was imported. And then we get to the first American ones like that, which were made by a famous woman named Esther Howland. She was a young woman who attended Mount Holyoke Female Seminary in Massachusetts. Her father was a stationer in Worcester, Massachusetts. And it's said that she was there at the same time as Emily Dickinson and that they shared leap year Valentines in 1848. I don't know if that's true, but I did find a book about the woman who was the headmistress then. Her name was Mary Lyon. And Mary Lyon told her young women, go where no one else will go, do what no one else will do. And it was a message that was a beacon for some of these women. They didn't do that in 1847, 1848. Esther Howland, she saw that her father, who was a stationer, had received some of these elaborate Valentines from England, and she decided that she could make them herself. She could do better. So she had her father get supplies for her, get some paper, get the little embellishments. She made some, and she convinced her brother, unwillingly, I understand, to take them on a shopping trip. And he took them out around New England to take orders and came back surprisingly with $5,000 worth of orders. We're
Wow.
talking 1848.
Yeah.
This was a grand sum of money. So she got some of her friends and she employed them on the top floor of her parents' home, and she made an assembly line before Henry Ford's assembly line, I like to say. And she would have a template. She would make one, and then each person along the assembly line would add something. If it was some kind of embellishments or some kind of paint, they would, and the finished one would be, would be something that she would manufacture and send all over. She even had an agent in California. I found an envelope from a San Francisco company that said that they were agents for the New England Valentine Company, which was her company, which is really amazing. So she was sharing Valentines vicariously. But the ones that she was making were small, and they're marked with her H, or with like H5, which meant 5 cents, or someone up to H100. There are very fancy, elaborate ones that we attribute to Esther Howland, which have never been marked. And even the Hallmark had a bunch of them. They wrote an article about the amorous Valentines of Esther Howland, and I had their curator check, and none of them were marked. So we think the rumor was that one of the suitors was rejected because the woman said he spent too much money. And, $50 at that time
Oh,
in the
yeah.
1850s, you could buy a horse and buggy. So we have these very elaborate ones. They have so many different layers and doors that open, and you have to get into it, delve into it to find what's at the end, which could be a lock of hair. It could be just a beautiful little love token. It could be a cobweb even. She used all of these things to make very elaborate valentines. They could be covered with silver laced paper or gold laced paper. But she was the mother of the American Valentine.
Wow.
But we're talking about 1850, and a lot of things were happening around that time. In America, we talk about some of the folk art ones also that were being made. Sailors' Valentines, which people may be familiar with. I can send you pictures. I have one on the wall right here. They were made mostly in Barbados by visiting sailors and brought home to America or to England. But they were love tokens made of shells. They're called Sailors' Valentines. Other things that were handmade, a lot of them were for sewing. Another kind of handmade token is what we call the map of matrimony. And the map of matrimony, the design, something like this is a very small one. They could be on postcards. They could be very large. And the map of matrimony takes you to places like the land of love, the land of jealousy, rough waters. These were popular themes, and people could send even postcards even into the 1900s with maps of matrimony. Oh, I wanted to show some examples of lace papers because the lace paper could
Oh,
be very
beautiful.
elaborate. There were designs with mythology and flowers and all kinds of symbolism.
One thing that again, because this is a very new world for me.
Right, right.
So when we use the term Valentine's, is it more broadly love letters or
Well,
tokens, or is it specific to Valentine's Day?
it's related to Valentine's Day, but in the early days, the Valentine was the person, and it evolved to become the gift. We'd select your Valentine. I'll go back and give you some of the history because there was a Valentine lottery, and you would draw the name, and that would be your Valentine for the year or your lover for the year. Didn't have to be your wife or your husband, was your lover. So the Valentine, the term really, from what I've read, they could be given any time of the year. If they were a month before the 14th of February or a month later, they were considered a Valentine because postal delivery system was very slow. In general, we call them love tokens, tokens of affection. There's other terminology. They were also given for friendship. They weren't necessarily given for Valentine's Day. They could be given, well, Valentine's Day was the time when a woman could send a Valentine. It could be anonymous. We hear about leap year when she could propose, but Valentines could always be sent by a woman. And sometimes they were signed, sometimes they weren't. That's sometimes when you buy one, it'll say, well, it was never used because it's not signed. That doesn't mean it wasn't used and received and maybe saved. See, we find these saved in albums, in trunks, in attics, between the pages of a Bible, nowhere. And many collections are coming available now where the people have aged and they want to sell them or sell them to people who would appreciate them. In the beginning, there was a person named Valentine. There were, in fact, 3 bishops in Rome with that name. And we've settled mostly on one, this priest who wanted to marry all the young people. He was a friend of the young couples. The emperor, Claudius I, admonished Valentinus. He forbade marriages. A married soldier would give his primary allegiance to his wife, not to his emperor. So he didn't want married soldiers. Well, Valentinus persisted. And eventually, the story is that he was arrested, he was put in jail, and he was sentenced to be executed. And the rest of that story is that he restored the sight to the blind daughter of the jailer. And on the eve of his execution, which was February 13th, he left a note which he simply signed, "Your Valentine." It sounds like a Hallmark moment. We never found that. We don't know, but it's a good story. And that's part of the history of this saint. He's no longer a saint, I think, in the religious sense. But the other part of the history of Valentine's Day is that there was a custom, a pagan custom in early Rome. And when the Roman soldiers went to England and stayed in England, they celebrated this holiday. It was really the rites of spring. It was the feast of Juno Februata. it was a time when they had a flaming altar. On this altar, there would be an urn, and in this urn would be a lottery. But from that lottery, a person would select the name of the person who was to be their lover for the year. Well, when the Romans left England, but the holiday was still there, and people loved it. There was all kinds of festive merrymaking. It was a jovial time. So what happened is Christianity was taking hold. They changed the name, but they kept the holiday. So it's really the old holiday with a new name. So those are the two origins. The
Okay.
other part that's important in this evolution that I talk about is one was paper, which we've talked about. As quality paper was available, you have more and more beautiful things. The evolution of the handmade and the folk art. There's also the postal system was very important because there wasn't a universal postal system. In England, it was 1840, in America, 1845. Before that, things were hand delivered. If they were sent by coach or by rail or by horseback, depended upon how much they weighed and what the distance was. And the recipient had to pay. So many, an irate father has said, rejected the valentines their daughters received because they would be voluminous and it was too much money and they didn't know who they were from anyway. Sometimes they were hung. I have one which is at the Huntington Library, which has a string attached to it because they'd be hanging from the doorknob sometimes. Another factor about these valentines is there wasn't a universal use of an envelope. Sometimes folded paper created a form of an envelope if it was hand delivered, but that would add to the weight. So you'll have sometimes the most beautiful, even with cobwebs, the most beautiful quarto, but it's been folded in
Yeah.
probably 8 pieces or 6 pieces and sealed with sealing wax and written on the outside. So now that we have the internet, it's exciting because we can find out who some of these recipients were. And that adds another delight to the collecting of Valentines to find out, did these people marry or where did they live? Or
That was a big question I had.
many stationers signed their paper. They were so proud of this work. So we'll have the stationers' names, the manufacturers' names embossed in the lace pattern. Sometimes it's hidden, sometimes it's very visible, but we have Mansell and Wood and Delarue. We have many companies. It was a huge business in England around 1850, and there was a lot of competition. We'll also find them with watermarks, and we can see that the paper might have an English watermark that's very early, especially in Pennsylvania. We have some of these wonderful watermarks. Being like a detective, it's wonderful. You get a magnifying glass out sometimes like this,
Yeah.
and you hunt and you try to find the name. There is a name in this one. This is a lace paper that would have been a sachet. It would have been folded. The manufacturer's name is right down here embossed in the center part. But sometimes, if there was a medallion in the paper, the maker might take the medallion out. And the only way you can identify it is by others that have the medallion. Sometimes there were like pirates who would take the plates and erase the names. So it's kind of fun. And
Yeah.
it's another aspect. There's colored lace papers, gilded lace papers. That's a whole study unto itself. And I once thought I would love to do a book with just silhouettes of all these patterns to try to identify, to help collectors. The older collectors like me, we're interested in all these things. A lot of the young collectors are not as interested, although we're trying to. I have a website, the National Valentine Collectors Association on Facebook. We have something like 1,800 members, and we have another marketplace site where we have people who want to sell their things. And we're trying to introduce these older, more antique, rare things to the young generations so they'll covet them and look for them and find them. A lot of the new collectors are just looking for more recent things that they can relate to, but that's all okay. And I think probably, like with me, one thing leads to another. Another thing that affected the manufacture, I mentioned the Industrial Revolution. People in the earlier times were making handmade things by candlelight, maybe with a knife, or some of the Sharonschnitt was made with sheep shears. I've learned that from the Guild of American
Wow.
Paper Cutters. The way that people made things, changed when we have the Industrial Revolution and things are manufactured commercially. And one of the things that happened was chromolithography, and we have colored valentines, beautifully colored. They no longer had to be hand colored or hand decorated. And that increased the popularity. People didn't have to spend as much time making them. It changed the flavor of them, I think, though, because people could go into a shop. But in the early days, people had so much time on their hands, no internet, no electrolyte.
No Netflix. At what point, because I'm just thinking, I love that this was, I feel like culturally society has shifted from Valentine's, particularly Valentine's Day, but shifted away from it being something that adults participated in.
Mhm.
And it's become kind of a child's holiday or a child's occasion. So, at what point, as far as the Valentine aspect of it all, I think we still
Well,
send cards, but at what point did manufacturers really start saying, okay, let's start shifting into the children as our
mhm.
audience?
Well, that's interesting from these manufactured ones. I don't really see children until we're talking about World War One era, and there were children's Valentines and school Valentines. In the 1930s, we have a lot of companies like Walt Disney started making series of Valentines based on their movies, and you might want to collect a whole series of Snow White or Pinocchio, and they're people who collect those, and I collect them, and they're wonderful. I guess that was more child oriented, although adults collect them now,
Yeah,
very,
yeah.
especially Alice in Wonderland collectors and things like that.
Oh, yeah, that would
Yeah.
probably be neat.
Yeah. So there's a lot of cross collecting, but I don't really see actual children's Valentines very much until I would say until after World War One, say 1930s. As we were moving evolution wise, we're now into the 1850s with Esther Howland, and then we have the Civil War, and that's a huge area of collecting. Not, I mean, for Valentines, they're very hard to find. I'm showing you a picture of one, which I don't have this actual one anymore. I had several. This is called the soldier's tent, and there's a little motto here. And when you lift the flag which drapes the tent, you have inside a man writing a Valentine.
Oh, wow.
See in the background, he's like thinking of the woman he's writing to. So there's many versions of this Sailor's Valentines. It was an important connection between home. People could buy packets, soldiers' packets. They're advertised in the newspaper filled with Valentines to send to your soldier. Another kind of Civil War Valentine. This is a handmade one, and it's done very much like a Sharon Schnitt with hearts. It's round. It was a typical style of a Valentine, and we don't know how the person who sent this acquired it. At this point, there was a sanitary commission. There were women who would help soldiers with Valentines, and perhaps that's how he acquired it, because he certainly couldn't create something like this template on the battlefield. But in it, he's addressed it's February 14th, 1862, and he writes it from a battlefield. And this writing all over it is a whole description of General Jackson and the bridge that was burned and the battle that they had. And then in one place, he says, "Purse your lips, take this kiss, it's for you."
Wow.
It's his address. So it is a Valentine, but it's a kind of primary research.
Hmm.
This kind of thing to me is fascinating.
It is so interesting. And you're making me wonder because as you're, one of the things I was thinking about as you're talking is what other sorts of things have you learned just from your collecting and the messages that have been written about history?
I mean, on the Civil War Valentine, sometimes, I mean, I've had them where it will say, take money for something, or, I mean, all kinds of personal messages. It said that Walt Whitman, the poet, would walk the aisles of Walter Reed Army Hospital in Washington, D.C., and give out stationery to soldiers so they could write. So I mean, there's so many stories, and you could focus on any specific area. So we've got Civil War, we've got chromolithography being very important, and we have important manufacturers and artists who contributed. This is an illustration by Walter Crane, famous artist. So there were artists who contributed a beautiful chromolithographed page. It was from a book called The Quiver of Love, 1874. And in it, there were 4 images by Kate Greenaway and 4 by Walter Crane, and poetry that went with them. But the manufacturers utilized these in many ways, monetizing, I guess, the book. So there were Valentines with poetry. They would open, they could be more elaborate. They could have ribbon borders, scrunched ribbon runching, I guess you call it. So this is one of Cupid. It says, "Love conquers all." And it has Cupid presenting a Valentine to this woman sitting under the cherry blossoms. and here are the doves. But artists like Walter Crane, Kate Greenaway, Maxfield Parrish, so many were important in these earlier Valentines. At the same time, we have beautiful fringed ones. This is from Louis Prang. Esther Howland was the mother of the American Valentine. Well, I think he's called the father of the Christmas card. This is a Valentine, but it has 4 pages. And luckily, it's printed on the bottom, Prang and the date, and the flowers are on cushions. And we have the violet and the rose, forget-me-nots, and more roses. And as I mentioned, the language of flowers, even if it didn't say to one I love, you know that the symbolism. So these were very elaborate. These kinds of cards were made for gift giving, but they were also album cards because people put together albums in their parlors. There was no television. The family would get together and maybe they would have parlor games or they would create these beautiful albums. Some of them are very beautiful and some have cards like these pasted in. We're getting into a period where there were another kind of Valentine called a comic Valentine or a vinegar Valentine. Nowadays, we have modern versions. They call them anti-Valentines, which I don't really like. But these comic Valentines were made, they really aren't just from the late Victorian period. I have watermarked ones from like 1820 that show the man is a snake or the woman is a devil. And
Like hate mail?
but like
Was this you
they
sent
were
to your
they were
enemies?
real social commentary. I mean, you can imagine. So people would probably try to just tear them up and throw them away. But they were happened to be on finer paper. But the ones like from the 1870s and up to 1900, up to 1890s, they were on cheap pulp paper. It said that Charles Howard, who was an artist for the McLaughlin Company, they said 20 million were sold in a year. How many how many people were made uncomfortable or
Yeah.
whatever?
I mean, what sort of message are you supposed
Oh, they
to send
would
on that?
make fun of everything, of your job. You know, if you were a shoe salesman, they'd say something erotic about handling, your the feet.
Oh my
If
gosh.
you were a wheel maker, your sniveling nose. If your appearance, they would describe your features. If you wore glasses, they would make fun of the fact that you wore glasses. They were awful.
Were they meant to be mailed in jest, or were people
Well,
actually
some were very large, and I don't know how
spiteful?
they were ever delivered. I think they were meant. Most of them were anonymous. I've found only a couple that have anything written on them. Usually, it'll maybe made it even worse. They'll cross out a word and put in another word that's
Oh
worse.
gosh.
I've found them with some scathing things that connotations that would not be allowed today. This is one not by Charles Howard, but it gives you an idea of how they made fun of the
Oh
appearance
my
of this
gosh.
woman.
So it's this woman with a parasol, but she's like a big caricature.
Yeah, and it
Um,
says, "Oh, girl, you want a Valentine? And so I choose you shall be mine. I'll cheer you up, and you'll declare you're 10 years younger than you were." But there's other things in this that are really interesting because one of the things besides people collect these also for the talked about cross collecting people who collect costumes because some of these early ones have the most fabulous, pointy toe shoes and beautiful, beautiful outfits that are just unbelievable. Their hats. This one has a hat with a feather. She's got her nose up. She's got a parasol, but she has this petticoat, and the red petticoat also has symbolism. So you can start searching on the internet and find out there's a whole lot. And once I asked, AI about the petticoats, and I got another. I'd done a lot of my own research, and I thought, oh my God, you have to be careful there. But there's a lot in these images, and so that's fascinating to look beneath them. This is also on a really poor paper, and you can see that it was folded. So this might have been in an envelope. The earlier Valentines that weren't sent, the cameo embossed, they had envelopes with the same embossing. And it's wonderful when you find a rose border on the Valentine and the envelope that matches. And these envelopes were, when they were postally used, they usually had multiple stamps on them because they were so heavy. So they become philatelic interest. And in the early days, I didn't take that into consideration and probably, didn't buy things that would have been worth a lot of money. But the stamps after 1850 in America, we have stamps that become very valuable. Moving along in this evolution, we've got the comic Valentines, we've got chromolithography. What happened with chromolithography is that the manufacturers, especially the ones in Germany, started making elaborate valentines, and they were being sold by dealers in America. And we have catalogs that will list them by price, by 1 cent or 10 cent, or they were never maybe 75 cents for a very elaborate one. And they're from about 1880 to up until World War I, really, up until 1920. And this one, you'll see.
Oh, neat.
This is Cupid's band. You open it.
Oh, so it's a pop, like a 3D pop-up
Yeah,
band.
this is one that I've already opened. It'd be easier to give you an idea. So there was this crepe paper at the top and at
Yeah,
the bottom.
they're so elaborate.
And I see prices have changed because I see 65 written on the back of this. So I'm not sure it would be that expensive now. Maybe it would. But they're wonderful. And these came in all sizes. You could get little ones, you could get bigger ones. The most amazing thing was that as transportation advanced and we have steamships, and you can have an open out Valentine that's a beautiful ship. You might have a sailboat. You might have a sailboat with swans. This is called
Oh, wow.
arm string. So it's got these several pieces attached. They're attached on the back, and they could be hung on the wall. And one time I did a display and I had many of them hanging on the wall.
Oh, neat.
But an interesting thing is that this cherub is very famous. This cherub was drawn by Frances Brundage, and she was one of the major illustrators in this period around 1900. They go from 1880s to about 1910. Frances Brundage, Frances Drayton, who did the Cupies. They were women who illustrated for these German manufacturers, and they were sold in America. Their names are sometimes lost, but there were many women artists.
Were
This
there
is
any regional differences in Valentine's? Is that
regional different? No, because the big regional differences are that in the middle of the country, I mean, you don't find these elaborate, fancy ones.
Mm.
You find more simple ones. There were dealers who sold all across the country. This is what was available. There weren't fancy ones that you would get in a fancy shop in New York or Boston or California. You do find some in California, and we have Gold Rush Valentines
Mm.
also from
Wow.
the Gold Rush period. Because these dealers, they went maybe on the train or how they traveled, but they would set up the catalogs, have names like Kansas and Oklahoma and Texas on them. So we know that things were available. Regional differences in that way. I visited a museum in Indianapolis one time, and all of their Valentines were this kind that I'm showing you. They didn't have any fancy laces. This is a chromolithograph blank. This one done by the company McLaughlin. And it has a layer of lace, and it has die cut scraps because they were no longer being handmade, and a message on the front. I should note that Esther Howland never put her messages on the front. She thought a message was private. So these are the kind, and sometimes you can find them in different colors with chromolithography and these beautiful manufactured Valentines I showed. There was suddenly an influx of postcards.
Mm.
People loved postcards. They could send a Valentine postcard to somebody in the middle of summer or December. It was just a way to trade postcards. And the postcards were also popular leap year, especially 1912 and 1908. There were a lot of leap year postcards. That's every 4 years. So that was one of the chromolithographic things. And I mentioned the ships. There were automobiles. The automobile was the rage. And so you would get an open out automobile or a postcard with an automobile. It was as if to say, if you'll be my Valentine, you can have an automobile like this. You
Yeah,
can have a car. I'll
a
take
bit
you
of a
on
bribe.
a bribe. I have one that has Cupid with a sewing machine, and probably that would definitely be a bribe. You can have a sewing machine, or you can have a trip on a sailboat. They're very fragile because they were done on a kind of cardboard that just dries out very quickly. So it's wonderful when you find one that was saved, in a box or protected from the light. Some of the open ups were a little more coarse. Some were very beautiful. This is a barometer of love. The
So it
tissue
almost
paper,
looks like a little gazebo with a
yeah,
barometer,
it
like
is with a
a
barometer inside it.
yeah.
It's got Cupid aiming his arrow, and the tissue paper has been airbrushed with the green and the pink. So there were different versions that usually this one is signed Clark, I think, the name on the back.
Wow.
Sometimes they say made in Germany. This one says Germany in the bottom. And they were imported when World War I started. That all ended. This is another one that is World War I, dated 1918. And it's a nurse, and it's got real fabric, and she's bandaging a wounded heart. And I was a nurse, so I collect
That's
that I thought have nurses on them, but I love it. And now I had some other ones out that I wanted to show you that were children. Some of them are circus animals that children would like, and some of them move. And some of them, like these two that I wanted to show you, Superman and Wonder Woman.
Wow.
This one, she says, for you, Valentine, I'd move heaven and earth. So they incorporated all of the popular themes. Today, you walk the aisles of the grocery store. I bought boxes of hologram Valentines and things with candy. I don't know what they're doing in my drawers now, the candy, but things to appeal to children. The ones for adults are reached by the candy makers and the florists. Chocolates are supposed to be an aphrodisiac. So that's one of the reasons that they always had Valentine heart-shaped boxes of chocolates for Valentine's Day, and roses, which are more expensive for Valentine's Day. And also the colors have symbolism also. The red rose is ardent love. The language of flowers becomes very much a part of the florist's messages also. So I've made a collection, and I encourage people to look on my Facebook page, National Valentine Collectors Association, and you'll see a variety. And now, because it's close to Valentine's Day, we're getting more posts, and people are discovering something that's from a slower time, something that reflects on our values and family. And many of the crafters also buy some of these to either copy them or use the parts, which I don't object to at all. Sometimes we encourage people to buy antique Valentines and regift them and save the love,
Yeah.
So that's a way that we can continue to celebrate it. Love makes everything go round. Makes the world go round.
And what a happy thing. Well, maybe not the vinegar Valentines, but
No,
what a happy
not
thing. What a happy
and
thing
they're
to find and
still
collect
available.
to research. Well, Nancy, this was wonderful. What I will do in the show notes is make sure that I link to the Facebook page, to the website, so that people can find you. We've been talking about how you'll share some images, so I'll put a blog post together. We'll also share that on the Instagram page so that people have some visuals to go by for the conversation. And I just thank you so much for taking the time to chat today. This was so lovely.
Pleasure. Okay. Thank you.